Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Ed Funders Out of School Time Impact Group. This is the monthly stakeholder call. Thanks for finding us today. I know we're slightly off of our schedule, but we're so glad you're here. So I know folks are still going to be joining in, but wanted to welcome you. My name is Rebecca Goldberg. I'm a co-facilitator of the Out of School Time Impact Group for Ed Funders, along with Kathleen Traphagen. We're excited for this conversation today. It is going to be an interactive conversation, so so glad you're here. So today's conversation is picking up on a series of calls that we had last fall for those who have been engaged for a while around the workforce development challenges in the field. And last fall, we had a series of conversations that you may remember that we're talking about the challenges and opportunities, emerging solutions to hiring and retaining staff. We knew lots of programs were and still are having trouble getting folks in the door working and keeping programs open to serve as many kids as they'd like. We talked about policy opportunities to address some of these challenges and strategies for building a diverse pipeline of leaders in the field. And then we also laid out some suggestions and ideas around what a comprehensive agenda might look like for systems change. One of the leaders we heard from last fall is Angelica Portillo at National Afterschool Association, and Angelica's back with us today. And we're excited about that because NAA has been busy working on an emerging framework around addressing the need for higher quality jobs in the youth development field. And at their convention, they laid out aspects of that framework, and Angelica is here to share that with us today. So you're going to hear more about where they're at in developing that framework. You're going to have an opportunity to provide feedback on it as well, because it's still in progress. And then Angelica has invited two of her colleagues, Tanisha Gibbs and Jen Curry, who were active in this process at the convention and led work groups on policy and research recommendations related to this job quality framework. So we'll hear from each of these three leaders today. And then we'll go into breakout groups where you'll choose which topic to provide feedback on, whether it's the overall framework that you want to talk about with Angelica, the policy recommendations with Tanisha, or the research recommendations with Jen. And I know that they're going to value all of your feedback. This is a great group of folks to be weighing in on what they're thinking about. I wanted to share that NAA is not the only organization that is looking at job quality and measuring job quality. We've also been in conversation quite a bit with the Families and Workers Fund that is partnering with the Department of Labor around also thinking about this framework for job quality, as well as how to track and measure job quality across industries. And they are primarily focused on service, healthcare, and many of the care fields, essential worker fields, really thinking about early childhood, I'd say, and some childcare and some of the older adult services that employ many people of color and women, and in particular. And that is not unlike our youth development field. So we've been connecting with them strategically around getting the youth development field on their radar because of the parallels that exist. And what's great is that their framework really is parallel to what NAA is leading on. So it was really reinforcing and validating that we're on the right track. So anyway, just wanted to share that we're talking with them. But before I go any further, I'd like to invite Angelica to come on and share some of the work at National Afterschool Association is doing on this. And we'll get our speakers' bios in the chat. So thanks so much for being here again with us, Angelica.
Of course. And it's great to see everyone. And I know I was looking at the participants in the room, and I think there's a few people that have already heard me talk about this quite a few times. So I'm glad that you came to this webinar and you're listening to our conversation again and the guests that we have. So I will begin sharing my screen and I'll go into the conversation. So for those of you who do not know, my name is Angelica Portillo, and I am the Director of Advocacy and Workforce Initiatives for National Afterschool Association. And thank you again for the opportunity to be here and talk about how NAA is creating a thriving out-of-school time workforce. So here's an outline of the information that I'll be going over today and the concepts that we'll be introducing. If you're not familiar with NAA, we are a national association. We deploy our mission through people-centered programs and partnerships, building equity, access, and connections to create a strong, valued profession that benefits kids, families, and communities. For years, NAA has provided resources, research, and advocated for the out-of-school time workforce. And you'll see here a list of some of those resources, and they are linked. So when you get to the slides, you'll be able to click on those. Some of the tools help support the professional development of after-school staff, and others are awards and recognition for leaders in our field. As the workforce crisis continues to be a challenge in our field, NAA has really prioritized workforce as a part of our mission and our commitment to equity. But it is unfunded, so it can limit the impact we have, but nevertheless, we continue to lead this national conversation. We really brought this to stage at our convention in March, where we had over 100 leaders spend 2 days really unpacking and answering the question, how do we achieve job quality in out-of-school time? And to begin that work, we have to set a foundation. So we created a proclamation on the profession. This was developed not only to use as a guide, but a set of principles in our work together. It was a promise to our field to acknowledge that the work of out-of-school time professionals matters and that we will create a path to a thriving out-of-school time workforce. And so I'll just give you all a moment to read over the proclamation here for a moment. So we'll definitely have more time, or you'll have more time to review this proclamation, but I did want to give you a moment to just scan over it. One of the first concepts that we introduced was the OST quality connection. Many of us are in this work for the youth and creating positive youth outcomes. And what we've come to learn is that to achieve this, we achieve this by delivering high quality programs. We have the assessments and tools to support staff and provide programming. We have the funds to serve our communities, but we don't have a stable workforce. We all encounter the same recruitment and retention challenges. And I know that sometimes keeping staff for 6 months is really great, but we'd like to keep them for a year, but that timeline just does not work for employers, staff, or the children. So how do we get to stabilizing the workforce? Through job quality. We need to ensure that we are designing equitable quality jobs for people to work and that people want to work. And this is what we call the out-of-school time quality connection. Guaranteeing job quality creates stability in our workforce that allows after-school professionals to deliver high-quality programs that ultimately lead to positive youth outcomes. So what is job quality? While there's no single definition of job quality is based on several factors that are shown in this graphic. And I want to clarify that that does not categorize jobs as either good or bad. Jobs land on a spectrum similar to program quality. Jobs can be at various levels of quality. And just looking at the indicators that are in this graphic, we all know that after school positions generally fall on the lower end of the quality spectrum. And when we think about our recruitment and retention challenges, we tend to think if we can just increase the pay that we'll have people that stay and want to work our jobs. And while that is absolutely true, and we do need out-of-school time professionals to be making livable wages and have good benefits, there's so much more that goes into creating quality jobs for our after-school professionals. And so how do we get them? We have to create quality jobs. And so from the National Fund for Workforce Solutions, we have the job design framework. This framework ensures that we design jobs that are high quality, equitable, and provide the necessary tools to develop and sustain our workforce. While in our field, we often discuss how we're preparing the workforce for tomorrow, we should be just as concerned with developing the workforce of today, and that's our own employees. At the convention back in March, our room of out-of-school time leaders provided input on how we can customize this framework for the field, and we got really great feedback. And so we are still continuing that process by bringing it here to GFE, and we'll be hosting a larger webinar with more of our NA membership in August to get their feedback on how we can continue to refine this tool to work for our fields. And this is something we'll also be talking about later in the breakout rooms. So where are we now? Since convention, we've been able to share these concepts on creating a thriving out-of-school time workforce at various conferences, webinars, and other national and state meetings. This message is really resonating with others, and we know that we're aligned with other industries and efforts around job quality, just as Rebecca had mentioned earlier, around creating good jobs and other workforce movements. In the fall, we'll be bringing together the work groups to work on some of the research and policy recommendations that you'll be hearing about today. And last but not least, we asked you to take this pledge. We had everyone at our convention take it as well. This pledge is to taking the necessary steps to create quality jobs, ensuring that we build a strong, valued profession, a thriving workforce that benefits kids, families, and communities. And if you're asking, what are those steps? Where do you exactly begin? It's with education, educating yourself on what job quality is and how you can incorporate it into your workplace. And so it's, understanding the job design framework, learning about it and using some of the tools and reading the articles that we have on the NAA website that were linked in the beginning. So there are tons of ways to get involved in thinking about job quality. And I think Rebecca will drop the link to the pledge if you want to see it in more detail. So thank you all. Again, if you've heard this presentation, I appreciate you again for being here and continue to stay engaged in this important conversation. And now I want to introduce Jen Carey and Tanisha Gibbs, both throughout the NAA convention and did tremendous work with their stakeholder groups. So we had various groups. We had those that are interested in policy, policy makers, those that influence policy. We had a funder group. We had out of school time and school leaders, and then we had data research and evaluation, and then we had a systems group. And so each of them really thought, how can these stakeholders take job quality to the next level? And when it came to research and policy, these two really just had an engaging conversation and brought to life so many recommendations. So I'm going to kick it over to them to share those a little with you. And I'll start with Jen.
Thank you. Thanks, Angelica. Thank you so much to GFE for having us here today. I could talk about this all day long, but I promise I won't. I will only use my time. But when we met to talk about, job quality in the context of research and data, and you all know this, so this is going to feel very obvious and familiar. We know that we have a lot of shortcomings in our sector. The Power of Us survey that's happening now is phenomenal. And up until this point, we also know that we've not had a comprehensive view on the demographics, hopes, interests, career paths of OST staff. So we're not there yet. We're getting this information now, which is great. But we know that there's just been a dearth of information so far in our work. We also know, and this is not unique to OST, but you really don't get authentic feedback from employees until exit interviews, usually, at least in any sort of systemic way. And that's if your organization is doing them. And what we do know is unique to our field is we have a ton of turnover. So, as exit interviews are happening, we know they're happening all the time, and people are often not only exiting their job, but exiting the field. And there's just a lack of opportunity to capture really good information and information that could be used to improve job quality at those points. And then the last sort of challenge, at least on this list in this time that we have, is of course knowing that most evaluation resources are geared toward understanding, youth outcomes. And really, I think even still to this day, I mean, those of us who've been doing this work for a while, I think this is less so true now, but, proving the worth of OST programs, right? Constantly having to say, look at how good we are, look at what we're doing. But we don't have a lot of evaluation resources looking at staff and looking at job quality. And, I think one of the big tensions for me, and I imagine many of you share this, is that, we all think, many of us believe it's a best practice to hire people from the communities that we're working in. And oftentimes, sorry for the noise, oftentimes that means hiring young people who are in our OST programs into staff roles, which in some ways is amazing and the dream. And in some ways, we really have to ask ourselves, what kind of jobs are we hiring them into, right? Are we putting them on a career pathway, or are we just saying, come work with us because we love you and we know you and we want you to be part of this program? But what does that mean for their futures? And so that's a real tension that we need to wrestle with. And, we had a lot of conversation about how research and better understanding the quality of employment in our sector and career pathways could help us navigate that tension. So you can go ahead to that next slide for me, and thank you. And I'll tell you a little bit about some of the solutions that we explored and research questions that we thought about, again, using that job quality framework that Angelica just shared, and really thinking about what kind of a research agenda we could put together that would get at some of those ideas. So, in terms of how we would go about this work, we know that OST staff have to be engaged in the design of the research agenda itself. This is a great opportunity for sharing power and listening first and being really human-centered in the design of our research. Second, we felt that any new research on job quality has to be really actionable. So, how can we bring in a toolkit, a template, materials so that we're not, this is not an intellectual exercise, but we're really thinking about, what can we do to make jobs better and more sustainable in our work. Third, we definitely need exploratory and descriptive research in addition to sort of impact research, right? And I'll say a word here because some of the work that I do in my day job is around professional development systems and online sort of learning management systems. So thinking about it from that perspective, we have so much data at our fingertips on training, on credentials, on the dosage of hours spent in training, right? Like there's just so much information that we have now that maybe 10 or 20 years ago we didn't have. So how can we start to really build in exploratory research and better understand just our baseline using some of this information that's at our fingertips? So all that said, we have about 5 research questions or groups of questions that we thought would be really helpful to explore as a sector. And this is not, one organization doing this or one geography doing this. This was kind of, at scale as a country, as a sector, nationally, what are the things that we have to look at? So the first research question is, if we speak to and try to learn from current and former OST staff, what are the factors that keep them in the sector and what are the factors that push them out of the sector? Number 2, what is the experience of staff with marginalized identities in our sector, both at the sort of local, regional, and national levels, and how can we make the sector more inclusive? Third, thinking about under what conditions is professional development most impactful on staff growth and on youth outcomes. So, really drawing that connection. And I think this is the money question, right? That we've been waiting for. There's a little bit of information on this, but how can we really draw some understandings about what it takes in terms of professional development to help staff grow, and then therefore, engage and support that OST quality connection that you saw on the screen a few minutes ago, in terms of dosage, content, format. How can we provide, like just engage in continuous improvement by providing the right kinds of PD that help people grow. Number 4, what are the components of strong career pathways in the sector? So really trying to understand within OST, so going from a group leader to a director, but then also interrelated sectors, because we know there are only so many leadership jobs in OST, and at some point career pathways probably have to wind out into related sectors as well. And finally, what management practices are most crucial to staff satisfaction and engagement? So really trying to understand the sort of supervision and leadership practices that support staff. And aside from those research questions, there's just a lot that we have to ask ourselves that more data can help us. How do we know what a good job looks like? Are some jobs good for now jobs that maybe, are not good for your whole career, and really trying to understand some of that. So that's a really short summary of a really long conversation about research and data. And I think now I'm going to turn it over to Tanisha to talk a little bit more about her group's recommendations.
Thank you, Jen and Angelica. All right, so I'm going to be talking to you all about what our policy subgroup discussed. And so I just kind of wanted to get us started off with this quote. Full-time childcare workers earn an average of $21,490 per year, and approximately 95% of those in the workforce are women. And there have even been studies that show that those are mostly BIPOC women, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, right? So we want to make sure that we are highlighting that, because when we're talking about policy recommendations, it's just not about what can support, the actual programs, but also what will support our workforce in the field. And this is reflective of our workforce. Next slide. So we came up with 3 significant policy recommendations. Some things we've actually seen have been making moves in different states and on kind of a national level as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about these three. So the first one is establish an occupational code for out-of-school time youth workers. And so when we think about an occupational code, it may not necessarily seem like it's a big deal or a big lift to some folks, but an occupational code will allow for us to be able to get our foot in the door in a couple of key specific areas. And so California has already started doing this work, and they've built a really good foundation, but the work needs a long-term plan in collaboration with not only national, but also state organizations on a shared vision. So what an occupational code does is it establishes a shared understanding of the job titles in our sector, job descriptions in our sector, and wages, as well as employment requirements of the OST workforce. And with this common language, staff and potential employees will gain a better understanding of the skills required and the opportunities for upward mobility and skill building that come with working in the field. So this framework established through the occupational analysis be a foundational first step in collecting accurate and relevant data on the incumbent workforce. And this is really going to be key for us when we're trying to establish different initiatives through the Department of Labor, like apprenticeships and other initiatives that will be able to support a pipeline for workers in the field. And so next, I want to talk about policy recommendation number 2. So that one tackles more so federal funding. And what we are asking is that federal funding will be provided from fiscal year 2023 to fiscal year 2025. And that's to support capacity building and a phased in expansion of income eligibility. And so when we think about really the funding streams that support families being able to access school-age childcare, we think more so about childcare subsidies. So we're asking for full government funding of school-age childcare in order to provide a continuity of care post-preschool. We've made significant advancements in our early childhood sector, but we would love to see some of the same energy, some of that same commitment for school-age childcare as well. And as I pointed out earlier, being that our workforce is predominantly women, we would see an overall increase in maternal employment by up to 10%. So that helps to support just our overall economy as well. Another thing that we are asking is that there's an increase for families being able to access childcare subsidies. So for various different reasons, funding through like the Child Care Development Fund, the Child Development Block Grant, those things do not necessarily reach enough families in need. So what we've seen is that there have been less than 20% of eligible children who have received assistance. And subsidies are also tied to employment. So like a loss of work, that may result in a loss of subsidies in care. And then also when we think about, our brown siblings who are immigrants, they have reported challenges to accessing subsidies as well, including a lack of information, eligibility concerns related to their immigration status, obtaining the documentation necessary to complete the application, finding the time to complete the application. As a parent, I'm sure we all can relate to that, if you're a parent as well. And also, of course, language barriers. So those are some things that we want to just highlight as well. And then next, we would like to request that the childcare subsidy rates are increased. And so that will help to support providers, because providers must be adequately compensated for the true cost of childcare, and that would be supported through childcare subsidies. So in New Jersey, there is current like appropriations from fiscal year 2022 to 2024 under the CCDF plan, but they're still using the 2018 rates. So currently the reimbursement, it states that they would give a center-based school-age provider for full-time care, which is defined as 6 hours per day, but they would give them $150 per week. which kind of falls in that 67 to 75th percentile in the draft plan at least. And so that would actually equal up to be $7,800 per student per year if they attended full time, which is 52 weeks. So as you can see, in the state of New Jersey, we could definitely do better. And I'm sure that either it's worse, and in some states it might be better, because the cost of childcare, it really varies, and it runs the gamut. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that in the last policy recommendation. Yes, same slide. So finally, our last policy recommendation, in fiscal year 2026 and beyond, childcare assistance expenses through vouchers will be shared between the state 10% and federal government 90%. Providers will be paid based on a valid and reliable cost estimation model or cost study for the payment rates of school age childcare services in the state. And so some of the things that we want you all to think about are different ways in which we can leverage public-private partnerships in order to develop local revenue sources to increase childcare subsidies. Additional sources of revenue can really keep childcare affordable, provide a continuity of care even during temporary periods of job loss, and ensure access to high-quality centers. And we'll talk a little bit about that when we are in the breakout groups. And lastly, just want to talk about the true cost of quality. So research really indicates that provider training, retention, and compensation are the best indicators of childcare quality. But those training investments must be coupled with higher wages in order to promote employee retention and continuous professional development. And there are a couple different ways that funders can support that as well. Another thing is that, like I said earlier, OST costs, they do vary widely depending on program factors, including the number of hours of operation, staff to youth ratios, the age groups in which the program serves, and the facilities used, all of which represent significant choices made by program leaders. And that's reflected in the Wallace cost study. And so Wallace has a OST cost calculator. Now I should drop those chat so that you all can access those. But I just wanted to highlight this particular image that came from the Wallace Foundation's cost study, but this again was done in 2009. So that is some years ago. And there are some efforts being done on the back end in some other areas on a national level to update the cost study. But again, these are things that are not necessarily backed by enough support as they would need in order to get that done. So if you look here, all of the different costs here are ranging. So this is school year programs serving elementary and middle school students. And I'll just let you look at those so that we can move forward, because I know we have to break out into the breakout groups. And if anyone has any questions, I can answer questions about this in my breakout. Thank you, Angelica and Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Tanisha.
Yeah, thank you.
There was one quick question from C. Fowler. I don't know if any of you want to address it now, just around the impact of the current rate of inflation on the workforce challenge, or we can bring that into the groups as well for folks to weigh in on.
We can talk about that in depth in our breakout group, but I do just want to highlight that as you all have experienced, inflation affects all of us, right? So down to the gas, and even when you think about people who are working in our programs, the cost that it takes for them to get to our programs, if they have children themselves, they're paying for increasing costs for other things. They're paying for increasing costs in food, and we have not increased their pay. And so those are things that we all need to take into consideration because they all affect us. And, you know, if we can do something about it, then we should try. But we can talk more in depth in our breakout group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up the breakout groups. There'll be 3. You can select which one you'd like to weigh in on more. So the first one is job quality framework with Angelica, policy recommendations with Tanisha, or research recommendations with Jen. One thing I want to encourage is if you represent an organization that employs folks, we really want to hear from you as to the impact of some of these recommendations and the framework, and how, how do we actually make this a reality for the field? So anyway, I'm going to open those breakout groups now. You'll have about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and hear a few reflections from the other groups that you were not a part of. So you should be able to go ahead and choose your group now. Welcome back, everyone. Check if anyone's there's still a few folks in their breakout, so I'll wait till they get back in, or I'll welcome them back in soon. So I hope you had a good conversation and were able to dig into some of these recommendations and share ideas and questions for the group. Jen or Angelica or Tanisha, or really anyone, I'm curious if anyone wants to just come off mute and share some insights or an aha you had in those conversations. And you can maybe, go ahead and come off mute, introduce yourself and which group you're in, or you can raise your hand.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start for our group. We were looking at the job design framework again. And I think for me, it reinforced that people are already doing the increasing pay, providing benefits, and they're ready for what's next. And the way we provide resources to developing and higher program quality, we're going to need to offer that same support for job quality and out of school time. And so I'm curious to see what that'll look like and how we can do that with our national organizations aligning more on this.
I can just add into that. I think I was in that conversation, and I also found that to be really helpful around thinking about what TA is needed for organizations to actually move along that spectrum of job quality and who provides it. Jen, anything from your group? Anyone in the research group want to share?
There were lots of things from our group. I'll chime in, and others should join me. We talked a lot about, how to make the sort of research questions very actionable and relevant in a couple of ways. One is through, wait, Horatio, I want to get your quote right. Doing research with the people and not to the people. And we talked a little bit about participatory action research and really thinking about what's realistic for organizations. So as Jamie mentioned, oftentimes when you have a staff vacancy, you just really need to focus on filling it because you have to meet ratio next week, right? And there isn't a lot of thought to what's going on. Why are people leaving the job? So really being able to kind of put this all in the reality of the context that we're working in. We talked about thinking through, in those research questions, not just what's pushing folks out of OST, but what's also pulling them out. So why is the grass greener on the other side, and how can we think through that? We talked a little bit about how hard youth work is right now. And it's always been hard. It's extra hard right now, and how to make sure that part of job quality is making sure that staff feel prepared and supported and have the resources that they need to do their job well, so they can feel good about it and not feel overwhelmed. And we talked a little bit about, sort of the existing Power of Us survey and how that's going to be powerful, no pun intended, in creating a baseline and gathering just this information at scale. And then alongside it, and not to say that this isn't already in plans, but just knowing that what we wanted to name is the importance of the qualitative research and the sort of subgroups, and getting in and really talking to specific folks, right? So whether it's place-based or staff of color, other groups who may have, who will definitely have perspectives and experiences that we need to understand in order to say these are good jobs for everyone, not just for some folks. And we talked about a lot of other things, but I'll leave it there.
Excellent. And Tanisha, do you or anyone from your group want to share a couple of thoughts?
Yes, so we talked about a couple of different things. One really interesting thing that just came up, David was saying one of the policy recommendations could be to include like after school educators or after school professionals, looping them in, not just in the public service loan forgiveness, just looping it into the loan forgiveness that is given to educators traditionally. Specifically, I know there's the initiative for educators in a urban school district. So not necessarily having after school professionals go through the public service loan forgiveness, but also having them fall under the ones for teachers. And I thought that that was really interesting. Another thing that Steve Fowler brought up was the Murray Kane bill and how it goes all the way to school age childcare. And we really should be looking at universal after school. That's happening in Vermont and that is building in California. And we really should start with that as like our framework at the base and not as something that we aspire to. So I really felt that was powerful. And Steve also said, you know, there's also other cities and other counties that are doing some things that we might want to check out as well. And that it's better for us to start at the level that we want because it will be difficult to add additional elements in on the back end. So I wrote all that down. That was really powerful as well. And lastly, Dave brought up for federal funding, number 2, that we could advocate expanding the current plan 2023 to 25 budget to redirect some of the existing funds that fall under for the STEM support and move that into OST support. There is a lot of federal STEM grants, but they have extremely low short and long-term impact.
Okay, lots there to unpack. Thank you so much for the quick summary. I know we're at the end of the hour. Just want to thank everyone for engaging with us today. I hope you have a restful weekend ahead of you. I think we're taking a break on these calls this summer, so look out for information on the website and watch whether or not you get a Zoom confirmation to know to join. But if you have other ideas on topics, please reach out to Kathleen or myself anytime. I'll throw my name, my email in the chat. And please do help promote the Power of Us workforce survey, especially with the summer staff who are still working. It is so important. You can also reach out to me directly if you want to talk about ideas for how to get that out there and promote within your organization. Thank you, Angelica. Thank you, Tanisha. Thank you, Jen. We really appreciate your leadership on this work.